So we've said that Congress is the lawmaking body of government. So let's talk a little bit more about the legislative process. So one thing to keep in mind is that the legislative process is designed to be complicated and multi-stepped. So we've already said that the founders, when they were writing the Constitution, created a system of checks and balances. The legislative process is really a way for both chambers of Congress to check each other. Also, the founders wanted to make sure that laws weren't just being passed based on the passions of the people. So something bad happens, the people call for a new law. They didn't want that, okay? They wanted it to be a process that required some thought, some discussion before a new law could be put into place. Because once a law is passed, it's going to affect the entire country, so all of the citizens. So this is why it's such a complicated and multi-step process. Each part of the legislative process is going to offer a chance to kill a prospective law or bill or piece of legislation. So I'm going to use all of those interchangeably. The first step of the legislative process is introduction. Anyone can come up with an idea for a new bill or law, but only members of Congress, so a representative or a senator, can introduce a bill. And it has to be formally introduced to the House or the Senate. One thing to keep in mind is that in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass in both the House and the Senate. So both the House and the Senate have to pass identical versions of a bill before it can go on to the president. The majority of bills are never going to become a law. Once a bill is introduced in either the House or the Senate, it's going to be referred to one of those standing committees. So for example, if it's a bill about agriculture, it's going to be referred to an agriculture committee. It may also be referred on to a subcommittee once it's in committee. And this is just so that those members of Congress with certain expertise or subject matter experience are going to be the ones working on these bills and evaluating the bills. Now, in committee, they are going to gather information about a bill. So they're going to hold a hearing, and this is where policy experts and interested parties can give testimony about the subject that's under consideration. So this is where they're going to inform members of Congress, the press, and the public about a piece of proposed legislation and its impact. So this happens in committee. Most bills are going to die in committee. However, if not, they're going to go on to markup. And in markup, the committee will make any kind of changes to the proposed legislation and produce a final draft that will be sent to either the House or the Senate floor for consideration. So once it gets to committee, it might be referred on to a subcommittee. They'll hold a hearing and gather information about a proposed piece of legislation. From there, it goes on to markup, where they will discuss it and make any kind of changes so that it produces a final draft that can be sent to either the House or the Senate floor for debate and consideration. Now, again, most bills are going to die in committee. However, in the House, they have what is called a discharge petition. And this moves a bill out of committee and onto the House floor for a vote. So if a member of the committee feels like the bill is just going to die, they can take a vote for a discharge petition to move that bill out of committee and onto the House floor. Consideration in the House. Now, as I said, each chamber is going to have its own rules for considering pieces of legislation. So this is after committee once a bill has moved onto the floor for debate. In the House of Representatives, they have what's called the House Rules Committee. And you can think of this like a traffic cop committee because they're going to be the ones setting the rules. They decide when a bill will be subject to debate and vote on the House floor, how long that debate will last, and whether or not amendments or additions will be allowed. So these rules that are determined by this House Rules Committee play a major role in whether or not the bill is going to pass out of the House. In the House of Representatives, they also have what's called a Committee of the Whole. So after those rules are adopted by the House Rules Committee, it goes to the Committee of a Whole. A piece of legislation is going to be considered by the Committee of the Whole. And this consists of all members of the House and meets in the House chamber but it's governed by different rules. So we said before that the House is much more formally structured, and this committee of a whole just gives a bit more relaxed rules for considering legislation. Only 100 members of the House need to be present for the committee of a whole. Most of the time, the committee of the whole consists of the whole House. And the committee will report its recommendation for a piece of legislation to the House for a vote. So this is just a faster means for considering legislation in the House of Representatives. So let's move on to the Senate and considering legislation in the Senate. Individual senators have more ability to shape outcomes on the floor. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that there's less of them, but it also has to do with some of the procedures within the Senate. Senators can place a hold or a delay on a piece of legislation that he or she objects to, so they place a hold on it so that it won't be considered or debated. In the Senate, they have what are called unanimous consent agreements, and these are going to set the terms for consideration of a bill. They can also limit the time for debate, which is important because in the Senate, they have unlimited debate. And this is where filibuster comes in. And filibuster is the power of an individual senator to use the right of unlimited debate to delay a motion. And by delay a motion, I mean delaying a vote on a piece of legislation. They could also try to delay a vote on some sort of federal appointment if they don't agree with the person that is being appointed. Okay, so that is what a filibuster is for. So in using this tactic, a senator, and in this case, it is Rand Paul of Kentucky. He's filibustering the CIA director nomination. They get up in front of the rest of the Senate and they just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And they can talk about anything they want to. They can read from the phone book as long as they stand there and keep talking. And in some cases, filibusters have gone on for hours and hours and hours. I believe the longest filibuster lasted for 24 hours, okay? So this is a senator trying to delay a motion, delay a vote on a piece of legislation, something of that nature. And only a cloture or a 3/5 vote can end that filibuster. So once a piece of legislation is voted on in the House and the Senate, it will go on to one of those conference committees that we've already talked about to reconcile the differences between the two versions of a bill. So remember, in order for a bill to go on to the president to be signed into law, it has to be the exact same bill. Okay? So that is why conference committees are important. So once those differences are resolved, a single bill will go back to each chamber for reconsideration and they'll vote on it again. From there, once it's passed both chambers, both the House and the Senate, it goes on to the president. And the president has a few options. He can sign it into law, he can veto it or reject it so that it goes back to Congress, or he can allow the bill to become a law by inaction. So by not signing it or not vetoing it, after so many days, it will become a law because he hasn't taken any action on it. So this is just a chart that you can look at that really kind of explains how a bill becomes a law. So it's introduced in either the House or the Senate. It goes to committees. From there, there will be a debate on the floor. Once it's passed in either chamber, it goes on to the conference committee where they reconcile those differences so that the House and the Senate are going to approve the same version of a bill. And from there, it goes on to the president where he can either sign it into law, veto it, wait 10 days, so that's that inaction where it will automatically become a law, or there's what's called a pocket veto where he waits 10 days. Congress actually is going to adjourn because it's the end of a session and it will not become a law. So this is called a pocket veto. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the presidency unit. And that is the end of this lesson.